He had built empires of glass and steel with a single phone call, a man whose name echoed in boardrooms across the world. But standing on this forgotten patch of dirt, he had never felt so powerless. The world's best engineers, his entire team of experts, had all looked at the land and agreed it was worthless. A barren, useless field good for nothing but dust and regret. They told him to forget it, to move on. But they were all wrong. Because the one person everyone ignored, the quiet old farmer with dirt under his fingernails, was about to do the unthinkable. He was about to prove that the greatest treasures are not always the ones that glitter. Stay with us, because what happens next will change the way you see the world. Mr. Sterling, a man of 50 years who looked 10 years younger, was the definition of success. His suits were sharp, his smile was sharper, and his bank account was the sharpest of all. He saw the world as a series of problems that money could solve. On the other side of this story was Mr. Abernathy, a man of 70 years who looked as old as the hills themselves. His hands were rough from a lifetime of work, and his only real possession was the very land Mr. Sterling now wanted. A quiet man with a quiet life, who knew that some things had a value that money could never touch. If you believe in the quiet strength of the human heart and the secrets hidden in unexpected places, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is like a gentle rain on dry land, helping stories like this grow and reach the world. We would be so grateful to have you with us. And if you could, please tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We believe that when good people from all over the world connect over a story, it sends a wave of positivity into the universe. May that goodness find its way back to you and your family, bringing you peace and unexpected joy. Chapter 1. The Barren Promise. The land was a sad sight. The sun had beaten down on it for so long that the earth had cracked open, like a thirsty mouth begging for a drop of water that never came. A few dry, yellow weeds were the only things that grew there. The wind would blow, picking up clouds of dust that made it hard to breathe. To any normal person, it was a piece of forgotten earth. To Mr. Sterling, it was a roadblock, an ugly brown square on his otherwise perfect map of a future luxury resort. He couldn't understand why anyone would want to keep it. It was, in his mind, completely and utterly worthless. One hot afternoon, Mr. Sterling's shiny black car rolled down the bumpy dirt road, a cloud of dust trailing behind it like an angry shadow. The car stopped in front of a small, simple wooden house. On the porch sat Mr. Abernathy, rocking slowly in an old chair. He didn't get up when the car door opened. He just watched as Mr. Sterling, looking out of place in his expensive suit, walked towards him. The CEO's polished leather shoes were instantly covered in a layer of fine, brown dust, and he fought the urge to wipe them clean. This was the first time they would meet. Mr. Sterling did not waste time with small talk. He pulled out a piece of paper and offered a number that he thought was more than generous. "Mr. Abernathy," he said, his voice smooth and confident, "I am prepared to offer you this much for your land. It is more than anyone else would ever pay for this property." He gestured to the dry fields around them. "I am building a world-class resort here. Jobs, money, progress. Your land is the final piece of the puzzle. You can take this money and live comfortably for the rest of your life." The old farmer stopped rocking. He looked at the paper, but he did not take it. He looked at Mr. Sterling's eager face, then he looked out at his dry, dusty fields. A soft, sad smile touched his lips. He took a slow breath, the air thick with heat and dust. Then, in a voice that was quiet but as firm as an old tree, he said, "This land is not for sale." He didn't shout, he didn't argue. He just stated a simple fact. For him, there was nothing more to say on the matter. The land was not for sale. A moment of silence passed. Then, Mr. Sterling did something that showed exactly who he was. He laughed. It was not a friendly laugh. It was a loud, sharp sound that seemed to mock the quiet peace of the countryside. "Not for sale?" he repeated, shaking his head as if he were talking to a silly child. "My friend, everything is for sale. You just haven't understood the offer. Let me explain it to you again, in simpler terms. I am offering you a great deal of money for a piece of useless dirt." In that moment, Sterling saw Abernathy as a problem to be solved, not a person to be understood. he saw a stubborn old fool standing in the way of his grand vision. His mind was already racing, thinking of new strategies, of lawyers and legal pressures. He was a shark who smelled blood in the water, and he couldn't imagine a world where a small, old fish could possibly stand in his way. The thought that the farmer might have a good reason, a reason beyond money, never once crossed the CEO's mind. It was simply impossible. But if you looked closely at Mr. Abernathy, you would have seen something else entirely. There was no anger in his eyes. There was a deep, unshakable calm. He looked at his land, and he didn't see worthless dirt. He saw the place where his father was born, and his grandfather before him. He saw summer nights and winter struggles. He saw memories buried deeper than any shovel could ever reach. He saw a history, a soul, a promise he had made long ago. He was not just protecting land, he was protecting a legacy. Finally, Mr. Sterling's patience ran out. With a frustrated sigh, he turned and marched back to his car. "You're making a big mistake, old man," he called over his shoulder. "A very big mistake. I will have this land." The car door slammed shut, and the shiny black vehicle sped away, leaving Mr. Abernathy sitting alone on his porch, slowly being covered by the cloud of dust his visitor had left behind. The old farmer watched until the car was gone, his face calm and his heart steady. We all face battles, big and small. Sometimes it's a powerful boss, and sometimes it's a quiet doubt inside our own heart. If you've ever had to stand up for something you believe in, please subscribe. You are part of our family, and your story matters here. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Mr. Abernathy slowly stood up. He walked down the porch steps and out into the middle of the driest, most cracked part of his field. He knelt down, the old bones in his knees cracking softly. He placed his entire hand flat against the warm, dusty ground. He closed his eyes, and as the last bit of light disappeared from the sky, he whispered something to the earth. A secret promise, a hidden truth, known only to him, and to the silent, worthless ground beneath his feet. Mr. Sterling was not used to the word no. Back in his tall city office, surrounded by glass walls, he looked at the big map of his project. The resort was a beautiful drawing of green golf courses, blue swimming pools, and grand buildings. And right in the middle of it all was a blank, ugly square. Mr. Abernathy's land. It was a hole in his perfect dream. He slammed his hand on the table. "I don't care how you do it," he told his team of men in expensive suits. "Get me that land. I want bulldozers on it by the end of the month." His team was very good at getting what they wanted. Two of them, a man and a woman who smiled too much, drove out to the farm. They did not shout like Mr. Sterling. They brought a basket of fruit, which they placed on the porch. "Mr. Abernathy," the woman said, her voice like honey, "we just want to talk. We are worried about you, all alone out here. We want to help you." They talked about the new resort, calling it Progress. They said it would bring new life to the whole area. They were painting a beautiful picture, but it was a picture that had no room for the old farmer. "Think of the children," the man said, leaning in. "This resort will mean jobs. New roads. A better school. Your neighbors are all so excited. You wouldn't want to be the one person stopping all that good, would you?" They made it sound like he was being selfish. They made it sound like his love for his land was a bad thing, a stubborn rock standing in the way of a wonderful river. Mr. Abernathy just listened, his face as calm and lined as the dry earth. He offered them a glass of fresh water. They looked at the simple glass and politely said, "No, thank you." When they saw their kind words were not working, their smiles became a little tighter, a little less real. "Mr. Abernathy, perhaps you don't understand," the man said. "Mr. Sterling is a very powerful man. This project is going to happen. It will be so much easier for you if you work with us." It was not a question. It was a threat, wrapped in a soft blanket of polite words. But the old farmer simply shook his head, his eyes never leaving theirs. "The land," he said, his voice quiet but strong, "is not for sale." But why would he not sell? What could possibly be worth more than a life of ease? The team went back to Mr. Sterling, and they were not happy. "He's hiding something," the CEO said, pacing his office. "I know it. No one is that stubborn for just a memory. Does he think there's oil? Gold? He laughed at the idea, but the seed of a new thought was planted. Maybe the old fool wasn't a fool at all. Double the offer, he commanded. And if that doesn't work, find another way. Find his weakness. The team knew exactly what that meant. The time for polite visits and fruit baskets was over. The pressure began in small ways. A few days later, a man from the county office came by. He had a clipboard and a serious face. He started walking around the property, measuring the fence line. "Just a routine inspection, Mr. Abernathy," he said. But it didn't feel routine. Then the letters started to come. Official envelopes with big, important-looking stamps. They used words that Mr. Abernathy didn't understand, words like eminent domain and public utility, but the message was clear: we can take this land if we want to. Mr. Sterling's team had also been busy in the small town nearby. They sponsored a town barbecue, giving out free food and showing beautiful pictures of the resort. They promised jobs to anyone who wanted one. Soon, the people in town, people Mr. Abernathy had known his whole life, started to change. They stopped waving to him when he drove by. They would whisper when he walked into the general store. They saw him as the man stopping their future, the cranky old hermit who was keeping their children from good jobs. The cruelty was quiet, but it was deep. One day, Mr. Abernathy went to buy seeds from the hardware store, just as he did every spring. Mr. Henderson, the owner, a man he had fished with for 30 years, wouldn't look him in the eye. "I'm sorry, Abernathy," he mumbled, looking at the floor. I'm fresh out of what you need." But the farmer could see the colorful seed packets stacked neatly on the shelf right behind him. He understood. Mr. Sterling had turned his whole world against him. He was truly, completely alone. Back in his office, Mr. Sterling got the news. Henderson had refused to sell him seeds. The town was on his side. The old man was isolated. "He's broken," Sterling said with a cold, satisfied smile. "He must be. He has no one left." He decided it was time to deliver the final blow himself. He would go back one last time, not to ask, but to tell him it was over. He put a new contract in his briefcase, one with a number so big he was sure no one on earth could refuse it. He was going to enjoy this moment. His shiny black car kicked up the same angry dust cloud as it sped down the dirt road. Sterling felt powerful, like a king arriving to take his castle. He got out of the car, straightened his tie, and marched up to the little wooden house. He was ready to see the old man's defeated face. But when he got to the porch, he stopped. The old rocking chair was empty, moving just slightly in the hot, dry wind. There was no one there. Then Mr. Sterling heard it. A faint but steady sound. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from behind the house. Coming from the middle of that worthless, barren field. Mr. Sterling walked carefully around the side of the small house, his expensive shoes crunching on the dry twigs. The thump, thump, thump sound led him to the middle of the field. There was Mr. Abernathy, his back to the house, his whole body moving with the effort. He was using a heavy old mallet to hammer a thick, rusty metal spike into the hard, cracked earth. Thump, thump, thump. He was marking a single spot, but there was nothing around it. No fence, no building, no tree. Just empty, useless land. Sterling frowned, confused. Why was he working so hard to mark this one worthless spot? "Abernathy!" Mr. Sterling shouted, his voice impatient. The pounding stopped. The old man turned around, his chest heaving, sweat dripping from his forehead. He looked very, very tired. But his eyes were still strong. "I told you, Mr. Sterling," the farmer said, his voice breathy. "I'm busy. The land is not for sale." Mr. Sterling let out a cold laugh. "I'm not here to ask. I'm here to tell you it's over. The town is against you. Your neighbors have turned their backs. I'm giving you one last chance." He held up a new, folded paper. "This is double my first offer. Take it." Mr. Abernathy shook his head, not even looking at the paper. "No," he said and turned back to his spike. Just as Sterling was about to lose his temper, another sound cut through the air. The rattle of an old, blue pickup truck bouncing down the dirt road. The truck door flew open and a younger man, his face thin and full of worry, ran toward them. He looked at his father, then at the rich man in the suit. "Dad?" he called out, his voice shaky. "Mr. Sterling? What's going on here?" This was Thomas Abernathy, the farmer's son. Thomas lived in the city, an hour's drive away. He worked at a factory all day and at a restaurant all night. But no matter how hard he worked, he could never get ahead. He was a man being crushed by a terrible weight. His little girl, Mr. Abernathy's granddaughter, was sick. She had a sickness that needed special doctors and expensive medicine, and the bills were piled high on his table. He loved his father, and he respected the farm's history. But every time he looked at his daughter's pale face, his heart broke. "Mr. Sterling," Thomas said, breathing hard as he reached them. I heard you were making an offer. A very good offer." He turned to his father, his eyes begging. "Dad, please. We have to talk about this. We have to." Mr. Abernathy looked at his son, and his face, already full of sweat and dirt, filled with a deep, new pain. "Thomas," he said, his voice soft. "This is our home. This is everything. It's dirt." Thomas's voice cracked, and a tear ran down his own dusty cheek. "Dad, it's just dirt. But Lily needs this. She needs this medicine. Your pride won't make her better." Mr. Sterling watched the father and son, and a slow, cold smile spread across his face. He said nothing. He didn't have to. He had found the old man's weakness. It wasn't the town. It wasn't the law. It was his own family. "Your son is a wise man, Abernathy," Sterling said, his voice smooth as silk. "He understands the real world. He understands what's important. He cares about his family. Why don't you?" He stepped between them, holding out the contract, not to the father, but to the son. The old man looked at his son, his eyes asking a question Thomas could not answer. "You don't understand, son," the farmer whispered, his shoulders slumping. "You don't know what this land is. You don't know what you're asking me to give up. And you don't know what it's like to watch your child get sicker every day." Thomas shouted, his frustration and fear exploding. "She is your granddaughter. Doesn't she matter more than this memory?" The terrible words hung in the hot, still air, and the silence that followed was worse than the shouting. Thomas felt broken. He had not wanted to hurt his father, but he felt backed into a corner. He turned away from the old man, his face set in a mask of pain. He looked at Mr. Sterling, the man who held the key to his daughter's life. "What is the offer?" Thomas asked, his voice low and dead. Mr. Sterling's smile grew. "Double the original. More money than you've ever dreamed of. Enough to pay every bill, to see every doctor. Enough to save her. All you have to do is get him to sign." Thomas's hand trembled as he reached out and took the folded paper. As he held the contract, his hand shaking, his eye caught something on the metal spike his father had been hammering. Tied to the top with a piece of old leather string was a small, dark pouch. It was made of weathered leather, old and soft, and it was tied shut. It looked like something a child might have made a long, long time ago. "Dad, what is that?" Thomas asked, pointing to the pouch. He had spent his whole childhood on this farm, and he had never, ever seen it before. It was not a tool. It was not a marker. It was something else. Instantly, Mr. Abernathy's tired sadness vanished. It was replaced by a sharp, sudden panic. "Don't touch that," he shouted, his voice a roar that shocked both men. He moved faster than Sterling thought possible, putting his own body between his son and the spike. He wasn't protecting the land anymore. He was protecting that one single spot. Mr. Sterling's cold smile disappeared, replaced by a deep, new look of pure, calculating interest. He leaned forward. The old man wasn't just stubborn. He wasn't just proud. He was hiding something. Mr. Sterling left the farm that day without a signature. He was angry, but he was also excited. The old man's sudden, wild fear over that little pouch and that rusty spike had changed everything. It was no longer just a piece of land. It was a mystery. And Mr. Sterling loved to win. "If he won't sell," Sterling told his team back in his shiny trailer office, "we will bury him. We own every inch of land around him. Start the construction. Start it now." right on his property line. I want him to hear our machines in his sleep. I want him to taste the dust in his food. He will beg me to buy his land." Within 24 hours, the world changed for Mr. Abernathy. The first trucks arrived before the sun came up, their headlights cutting through the morning fog. Then came the big machines. Giant yellow bulldozers with teeth of steel, and tall excavators that looked like hungry dinosaurs. The ground, which had been quiet for 100 years, began to shake. The noise was a living thing. A loud, screaming, crashing roar that never, ever stopped. It was the sound of progress, and it was a weapon aimed right at the old farmer's heart. A wall of brown dust rose up from the construction, so thick that it blocked out the sun. It settled on Mr. Abernathy's little house, covering the windows in a layer of grime. It covered his porch, his rocking chair, and the small garden his wife had planted long ago. The old man sat on his porch, a cloth over his mouth, watching the metal monsters tear up the earth just a few feet from his fence. He looked very small. He looked very, very tired. But he did not leave. He just sat and watched, his hand tightly closed around the little leather pouch. Thomas came to visit his father, his heart breaking at what he saw. The noise was so loud they had to shout inside the house. There was dust in the water glasses. "Dad, this is madness," Thomas yelled, holding up a loaf of bread now gritty with dirt. "He's trying to drive you out. Just sign the paper. What is so important that you would live like this? What is in that pouch?" His father looked at him, his eyes full of a sadness Thomas could not understand. "It's not what's in the pouch, son," the old man said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "It's what the pouch is for." From his air-conditioned trailer on a nearby hill, Mr. Sterling watched the farm through a pair of powerful binoculars. He saw the dust. He saw Thomas yelling. He saw the old man, sitting on his porch like a statue, clutching that small, mysterious pouch. "Dig closer to his fence line," Sterling ordered the foreman. "I want to see what he does. Keep your eye on that spot he marked with the spike. I want to know what's there." Sterling was no longer just building a resort. He was on a treasure hunt, and he could feel he was getting close. The foreman, a big man named Mike, climbed into the cab of the largest excavator. He was a good worker, and he just wanted to get the job done. He drove the machine right up to the thin wire fence that separated Sterling's land from Abernathy's. His job was to dig a deep trench for the resort's main water pipe. The giant metal bucket plunged deep into the earth, pulling up huge scoops of dirt and rock. 1 foot deep, 5 feet deep, 10 feet deep. The machine groaned as it dug deeper and deeper into the hard, dry ground. Then, something strange happened. The machine hit something. Mike felt it through the controls, a hard thud that wasn't a rock. A rock would scrape or crack. This was different. It felt heavy and deep. "What in the world?" he muttered. He stopped the machine, the sudden silence feeling louder than the noise had been. He climbed out of the cab and walked to the edge of the deep, dark trench. He looked down, shielding his eyes from the sun. What he saw made his blood run cold. Down in the shadows of the hole, sticking out from the wall of dirt, was something that did not belong. It was not a rock, not a pipe, and not a tree root. It was dark, like old wood, but it was perfectly smooth and round. It was huge, thicker than a telephone pole, and it was going straight down. It was buried at least 15 feet deep. He had only uncovered the very top of it. It looked just like the rusty spike the old farmer had been hammering into the ground. But this was not a spike. This was something massive. Mike grabbed his radio, his hand shaking just a little. Boss," he said, his voice suddenly dry. "You need to get down here. Now." He looked across the field at Mr. Abernathy's house. The old man was no longer on the porch. He was standing right at the fence line, his body stiff, his hand gripping the wire fence so hard his knuckles were white. He was staring not at Mike, but at the deep, dark hole in the ground. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with a look of pure, agonizing terror. He knew. He had always known. And now they had found it. Mr. Sterling's black car sped toward the trench. He jumped out before it even stopped, his mind racing. Well, a buried treasure chest? A lost bunker? He ran to the edge and looked down. He saw the top of the giant, dark object, buried deep in the earth. He looked at Mike, then at the terrified old farmer standing at the fence. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Sterling's face. He didn't know what it was, but he knew one thing for sure. It was worth a fortune. And it was all on his side of the fence. Or was it? Mr. Sterling's heart hammered in his chest. This was it. This was the reason the old fool wouldn't sell. He had found it, just a few feet from the fence line. "Get more men," he shouted, his voice high with excitement. "I want this thing dug up. Carefully. I don't want it scratched. It could be worth millions." His men scrambled, grabbing shovels, ready to uncover the treasure that was surely his. He leaned over the edge of the deep hole, his eyes wide and greedy, imagining his name in the newspapers. He had beaten the old man. He had found the secret. But one person on his team was not moving. A young woman named Elena stood back from the crowd. She was a geologist, a scientist who studies the earth. Mr. Sterling had hired her to check the ground for his resort, to make sure it was safe to build on. She was quiet and most of the men ignored her. Elena was not looking at Mr. Sterling, and she was not looking at the men. She was looking across the fence, at Mr. Abernathy. The old farmer had his eyes closed, and he was rocking back and forth, his face pale with a sickness and fear that made her stomach feel cold. She knew in her heart, with a certainty that scared her, that this was not a treasure hunt. This was like finding a secret diary and reading it out loud to the world. Mr. Abernathy's terror felt like a warning. She turned her attention to the dark object in the hole. The men were scraping at it with shovels, and the sound made her wince. "Stop," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The men paused. "Sir," she said, turning to Sterling, "we should be careful. We don't know what that is. It doesn't look like any pipe I've ever seen." Mr. Sterling glared at her. "I don't pay you to be careful, I pay you to find problems with the foundation. This is not a problem. This is a prize. Now get out of the way." He waved his hand, dismissing her like a fly. The men went back to digging, but Elena's words had made them nervous. They dug more slowly, scraping away the dirt from the top of the smooth, dark object. It was wider than they thought. Much wider. As they cleared the dirt, they all saw it. This was not a pillar. It was curved. Elena watched, her mind racing. Why was it curved? And why was it so smooth? It didn't look like man-made metal or concrete. It looked almost like glass, but dark and hard as stone. And the old man, Mr. Abernathy, he hadn't moved. He just stood at the fence, a silent, heartbroken statue. Why was he so sure of what it was? And why did he hammer that spike into the ground on his side of the fence, if the object was over here? It didn't make any sense. Unless what they were seeing wasn't the whole thing. An hour later, Mr. Sterling called a stop for lunch. He was frustrated. The object was bigger than he thought, and it was taking too long. "I'm bringing in the heavy machines after lunch," he announced. "We'll rip it right out of the ground." As the men left for the trailers, Elena's heart pounded. Rip it out? He could destroy it. He could destroy everything. She looked at the empty trench. She looked at the old farmer, who had sunk to his knees by the fence. She made a choice. She grabbed her small geologist's hammer and her sample bags. When no one was looking, she slid down the wall of dirt into the deep, dark trench. It was quiet down here, and cool. The air smelled like old, wet earth. She stood in front of the object. It was taller than her. She reached out and placed her hand on its surface. It was not glass. It felt alive. Like petrified wood, but smoother, warmer. She took out her hammer and tapped it. It made a low, soft ringing sound, like a bell. A sound that seemed to travel deep, deep into the ground. She knew this was not a treasure chest. It was not oil. It was something else. Something ancient. Something the world had never seen. She scraped at the dirt near the bottom of the trench, where the object went even deeper. She had to see which way it went. Was it just a giant pole, buried in the ground? Or was it something more? Her fingers, digging in the loose dirt, hit more of the smooth, hard surface. But it wasn't going down. It was turning. It was going sideways. Her eyes grew wide. She dug faster, her hands scraping at the packed earth. The object was a massive curve, like the knuckle of a giant's finger. It was turning, angling away from Mr. Sterling's land. She followed the curve, digging with her bare hands, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She knew, even before she uncovered the proof, where it was going. The massive object, this impossible ancient thing, was only starting here. The rest of it, the main part, was not on Sterling's property at all. Elena scrambled back, breathing hard. She looked at the path of the curve. It was pointing like an arrow. It was aimed directly, without any doubt, right under the fence. It continued deep underground, spreading out like the roots of a forgotten mountain, straight into the middle of Mr. Abernathy's worthless field. Mr. Sterling hadn't found a treasure. He had found the doorknob. The old farmer wasn't guarding a single spot. He was guarding the whole house. Elena stood alone in the cool, deep trench, her hand pressed against the dirt that covered the massive, curving object. Her mind was reeling. It was all a lie. The worthless land was a lie. The old man wasn't a fool, he was a guardian. He was protecting this. And this thing, was bigger than a house. It was bigger than a shopping mall. It was a shape so large she couldn't even imagine its edges. It was an impossible secret, sleeping soundly beneath the dry, cracked dirt of Mr. Abernathy's farm, and Mr. Sterling's men were about to wake it up with a bulldozer. She looked up, her heart pounding, and her eyes met Mr. Abernathy's. He was still kneeling at the fence, but his head was up. He was staring right at her. He had seen her digging. He had seen her follow the curve. He knew that she had found the path. His eyes, full of terror just moments before, now held a different, deeper pain. It was a look of complete and total defeat. He had protected this secret his entire life, and a stranger in a hard had uncovered it in less than 5 minutes. His shoulders slumped, and he looked away, a broken man. In that one look, Elena's life changed. She was a scientist. She worked with facts, with rocks and soil. But this was not about facts. This was about a promise. She suddenly felt the weight of the old man's secret on her own shoulders. She heard the sound of the men returning from lunch, their voices loud and careless. She had to make a choice, and she had to make it fast. She looked at the patch of dirt she had dug away. With frantic, quiet hands, she pushed the loose earth back, covering the curve, hiding the path that led under the fence. She made it look like no one had ever touched it. When Mr. Sterling marched back to the trench, he saw her climbing out, her face dusted with dirt. "Well?" he barked, his voice sharp with impatience. "What is it? Is it valuable? Is it gold? What did you find?" He was a shark who smelled blood, his eyes fixed on the dark, exposed object. Elena took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had to tell him the truth, but a truth that would stop him, not make him dig faster. She held up her hands, which were red and sore. "I don't know what it is, sir," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "I've never seen anything like it," she continued, looking him right in the eye. "It's not any metal I recognize. And it's not a rock. It's something else. It's incredibly dense. Unbelievably hard." Sterling's face fell. "Hard? What do you mean hard? I don't care if it's hard. Get the big machine. I want it ripped out of the ground before dark." He was a man who believed any problem could be solved with a bigger hammer. He was about to give the order that would change the world forever, and not in a good way. "Sir, wait," Elena said, stepping in front of him. "If you do that, you will break your own machine." She pointed to the excavator. "That bucket is made of reinforced steel. This object, whatever it is, I think it's harder. Much harder. You won't break it. It will break you." To prove her point, she pulled out her geologist's hammer, a tool built to chip pieces off solid rock. In front of Sterling and his entire crew, she swung it with all her strength against the dark, smooth surface. Clang. The sound was not a thud, like hitting rock. It was a high, clear, ringing sound, like a giant, dark bell. It sang in the air for a second, making the men cover their ears. A painful vibration shot up Elena's arm, making her drop the hammer. She looked down at her hand, her fingers stinging. Then one of the workmen gasped and pointed. Look at the hammer." Elena picked it up. The steel head, which could break granite, had a large, fresh chip missing from its edge. The dark object didn't have a single scratch. A dead silence fell over the construction site. The men stared, their faces pale. Mr. Sterling looked at the chipped hammer, then at the perfect, smooth object, and his face turned a dark, ugly shade of red. This wasn't a treasure chest. It was a roadblock. A billion-dollar roadblock. Useless, he screamed, kicking the dirt. It's worthless. And it's in the way. If we can't break it, we'll have to dig around it. Do you know what that will cost? Do you? His greed had turned to pure, blind rage. He was so busy counting his money, he couldn't see the miracle right in front of him. That night, Elena could not sleep. The sound of that clang was still in her ears. The look in the old man's eyes was burned into her mind. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Mr. Sterling would not stop. He would come back with bigger machines, with explosives, with anything it took. He would tear this thing apart, and he would destroy the old man's land to do it. She had to know what it was. She had to know what she was trying to protect. Under the light of a pale white moon, she snuck back to the quiet, dark farm. The site was empty, the big machines sleeping like metal skeletons. She slipped past the single, sleepy security guard and slid back down into the trench. It was even scarier at night. She took a small, silver device from her pocket. It was a portable ground sensor, a piece of equipment far too expensive for this simple job. She had brought it for her own private research. She held her breath, and she turned it on. The screen lit up, casting a green glow on her face. At first, there was just static. She pointed it at the dark object. The screen flickered. A line appeared. Then another. And another. It was tracing a shape that was smooth and curved and massive. A shape that went down, down, down into the earth, far deeper than any machine could dig. It spread out under the fence, under the whole farm, like a sleeping hand. But then, something else happened. A new signal appeared on the screen. It was not a shape. It was a pulse. A single, tiny, repeating blip of energy. It was coming from the very center of the shape. From the exact spot where Mr. Abernathy had hammered his rusty metal spike. Elena stared at the small green screen, her whole body frozen. Beep, beep, beep. It was not a machine. It was not a radio signal. It was slow, steady, and deep. It felt like a heartbeat. A giant, sleeping heartbeat coming from far, far beneath the ground. She realized with a cold wave of fear that the thing they had found was not just a strange rock. It was not dead. It was alive. And the rusty metal spike the old man had hammered into the ground, it wasn't a marker. It was a listening post. It was a way to check the pulse of the earth itself. She scrambled out of the trench, her mind a blur of terror and wonder. What had they done? What had she done? She couldn't go to Mr. Sterling. A man like that, if he knew this thing was alive, he wouldn't protect it. He would try to own it. He would put it in a cage. She had to go to the only other person who knew the truth. She ran, stumbling in the dark under the wire fence, and up to the old wooden porch. She pounded on Mr. Abernathy's door with both fists. "Mr. Abernathy! Please, you have to help me. I know. I saw the signal. I think it's alive." The door creaked open, just a few inches. The old man stood in the darkness, but she could see his face in the moonlight. It was a mask of pure, heartbreaking sorrow. He had not been asleep. He had been waiting. "You did it, didn't you, girl?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "You went back. You listened." He opened the door wider. "You'd better come in. You've woken the neighbors. Now you might as well see what you've done." His voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was the sound of a man who had just lost everything. He led her into the small, clean kitchen. On the simple wooden table, under a single dim light, sat the little leather pouch she had seen tied to the spike. He untied the leather string and poured the contents into his worn, leathery hand. It was not gold, or jewels, or money. It was just dirt. But it was the most beautiful dirt Elena had ever seen. It was black and rich and full of life. It was damp as if it had just been rained on. "This," he said, "is from the spot. From the heart. My great-grandfather found it," he said, his voice quiet. "This land, It isn't dead. It's just sleeping. The thing below, we call it the heart. It's ancient, and it feeds the land. It keeps it alive. But it's been sick for a long time. Getting weaker. He looked at his hands, covered in the rich, dark soil. We are its guardians. We don't own it. We just listen. We protect it. The spike is how we hear its heart. The pouch is to remind us what we are protecting. A promise of life. And now, you've told the world. The next morning, Elena felt like she had not slept in a year. She was torn. She was a scientist, but she was also a guardian now. Mr. Sterling was waiting for her, his face like a thundercloud. Well, he stormed into her small trailer office. I want a report. What is that thing in the ground? What is it? Tell me. Now. He slammed his hand on her desk, scattering her papers. He was a man on the edge, a man who hated mysteries he could not buy. Elena looked him straight in the eye. She had to make a choice. The fate of the old man, and the sleeping heart, was in her hands. It's an igneous intrusion, she said, using the biggest, most boring words she could think of. It's a huge, worthless piece of volcanic rock. Basalt. Harder than steel, but completely useless. It's not gold. It's not a treasure. It's just a rock, sir. A giant, stupid rock that got in your way. Mr. Sterling's face went from red to a pale, sick white. Worthless, he whispered. A rock. Then Elena added the final, terrible lie. And the worst part, sir, my ground sensors show it's not just that one spot. It's everywhere. The entire formation spreads out. It's miles wide, and it's right under Mr. Abernathy's land, too. The whole area is one solid, unbreakable, worthless mass of rock. You can't build here. You can't dig. It's a complete loss. No. Sterling's legs seemed to give way, and he sat down hard. His entire project, his dream, his millions of dollars, all ruined. Beaten by a stubborn old man and a giant rock. He had lost. He put his head in his hands. But then, after a long, terrible silence, he slowly looked up. His eyes were different. The anger was gone, replaced by a new, cold, calculating light. Wait, he said, his voice a low growl. You said, harder than steel. You're sure of that? Elena's blood ran cold. No. What had she done? Why, yes, she stammered. The hammer. Exactly, Sterling said, a slow, terrible smile spreading on his face. He wasn't a builder anymore. He was a miner. So, you can't build a resort on it, but what if you could cut it? What if you could sell it? For drills? For the military? For armor? He grabbed his phone. Get me the head of our industrial materials division. Tell him I've found a new resource. Something that could change everything. He finished the call and stood up, his eyes glittering with a new, terrifying greed. He looked out the window at the old farmer, who was standing on his porch with his son, Thomas. He knew, Sterling whispered, his voice full of a new, twisted respect. The old man knew. He wasn't guarding a memory. He was guarding a mine. He strode out of the trailer, his suit now perfectly straight. He didn't just walk to the farmhouse. He marched. He kicked the front door open, making Thomas jump back. I know what you have, old man, he snarled. And I'm not offering to buy your land anymore. I'm offering to be your partner. Mr. Sterling's words hung in the small, dusty room. Partner. The word felt sharp and cold, like a piece of broken glass. Thomas Abernathy looked from the rich CEO to his tired old father. Partner? A partnership meant money. It meant medicine. It meant his little girl, Lily, could laugh again. Dad, Thomas whispered, grabbing his father's arm. Dad, listen to him. This is the answer. This is everything. We can save her. Please. He was begging, his eyes filled with a desperate, painful hope. Mr. Abernathy looked at his son's face, and his own heart felt like it was tearing in two. He loved his granddaughter more than the sky. But then he looked at Mr. Sterling, at the greedy fire burning in the CEO's eyes. He knew what kind of partner this man would be. Sterling didn't want to share. He wanted to conquer. He would bring in giant saws, explosives, and armies of men. He would rip the heart out of the earth, piece by piece, and sell it to the highest bidder. And he would, without a doubt, kill it. "No," Mr. Abernathy said. His voice was just a breath, but it was as strong as the thing he protected. "It is not a mine. It is not for sale. It is not for partners." Thomas's face crumpled. "No? Then what? Why are you doing this to us? To her?" Mr. Sterling let out a short, ugly laugh. "He's lost his mind," he said to Thomas. "Your father is a crazy old man, standing on a mountain of gold and choosing to starve. But that's okay, because I don't need his permission." The CEO's smile vanished. "I gave you a choice," he snarled at the old man. "I tried to be kind, but my patience is gone." He turned to Thomas, his voice becoming smooth and dangerous. "Your father is a fool, but you are not. That thing starts on my land. My lawyers tell me that gives me a claim. I have a legal right to follow it, wherever it goes. And I will dig it up." He stepped closer to Thomas, his eyes holding the younger man's. "I will get it. The only question is whether you and your daughter get nothing, or whether you get rich." This was a new, terrible pain for Thomas. It was a choice between his father and his daughter. "Dad," he cried, his voice breaking, "please, just tell me why. What is this? What is so important that you would let Lily, that you would let us lose?" He was sobbing now, his hope finally shattered, replaced by a deep, dark anger. "Tell me, what is this secret? What is this dirt worth more than your own family?" He was yelling in his father's face, and Mr. Abernathy just stood there, taking it, his own tears running silently into the lines on his face. "You want to know?" the old man finally choked out, his whole body shaking. "You really want to know what you're asking me to sell?" He looked at Sterling's smug face and then at Elena, who was standing by the door, her own face pale with dread. "It's not a rock," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's a seed." Mr. Sterling and Thomas just stared, confused. "A seed?" Sterling scoffed, rolling his eyes. "A seed for what? A giant beanstalk?" "A seed from the stars," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice so quiet they had to lean in. "It fell longer ago than all the stories. My grandfather's grandfather, his grandfather told him the legend. It landed here and it went to sleep." He looked at the floor as if he could see through the wood, through the dirt, and into the heart of the world. "It's not sick, son. It's growing. It's getting ready." He looked at his son with a terrible ancient sadness. "And we are the guardians. We don't protect it from the world. We protect the world from it." Elena's mind flashed back to the small green screen. The beep, beep, beep. That steady pulse. It wasn't the sound of a sleeping heart. It was the sound of a heart starting. It was getting stronger. And she suddenly understood the dry, cracked earth, the yellow weeds, the deep drought. The seed was drinking. It was pulling all the water, all the life, all the energy from the land for miles around, pulling it all into itself. It was getting ready to be born. "Growing?" Thomas whispered, his anger gone, replaced by a new, cold fear. "Growing into what?" But before Mr. Abernathy could answer, a low, deep sound filled the air. It was not a sound, but a feeling. It rumbled up through the soles of their shoes, through the floorboards of the little house. It was not the sound of the construction machines. It was coming from deep, deep beneath their feet. The old farmhouse groaned. A glass on the kitchen table trembled, slid 2 inches, and then fell to the floor, shattering into 1,000 pieces. Elena's hand flew to the pocket of her vest, where her ground sensor was still on. She pulled it out. The screen was no longer calm. The single, slow pulse was gone. It had been replaced by a frantic, racing line. Beep, 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 beep. It was fast. It was strong. It was awake. The world was no longer still. The shaking was not like an earthquake, which is angry and fast. This was a slow, deep, powerful thump. Thump, thump. It was the sound of a giant's heart, waking up under their feet. The walls of the little house creaked. Dust fell from the ceiling. Outside, Mr. Sterling's giant, yellow bulldozers, machines that had seemed so powerful, now looked like tiny, forgotten toys. They were shaking too, rattling on the vibrating earth. Mr. Sterling, a man who had never been afraid of anything, stumbled backward, his face as white as a sheet. He grabbed the doorframe to keep his balance. "What is this?" he yelled, his voice high and thin. "What is happening? Make it stop." He was a king who had just realized his castle was built on a sleeping dragon, and his digging had poked it in the eye. He looked at his multi-million-dollar construction site, and for the first time, he didn't see a resort. He saw a grave. He saw the edge of a hole so deep and dark that all his money meant nothing. He was at last truly helpless. Thomas rushed to his father, his own body trembling. All the anger from moments before was gone, washed away by a cold, pure fear. "Dad," he choked out, grabbing the old man's shoulders. "You were telling the truth. It's real. All of it." He looked wildly around the shaking room. "What is it doing? What did he do?" His voice broke. He wasn't thinking about his daughter's medicine anymore. He was thinking about his daughter. He was thinking about a world that might not be there for her tomorrow. "We woke it," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice a low, sad whisper. He was the only one not looking around in panic. His eyes were fixed on the middle of his field, on the spot where the rusty spike stood. The spike was now vibrating so hard it looked like a blur. All the noise, the digging, the pounding. He looked at Mr. Sterling with empty eyes. "You didn't just knock on its door. You took a hammer to its head. It's not just awake. It's hurt. And it's terrified." Elena was staring at her small green screen, her face frozen in horror. The fast beep 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 had changed. It was now a long, loud, steady SE. "No, no, no," she whispered to herself. "It's not just a heartbeat. It's calling. The signal. It's not a pulse anymore. It's a message. It's pushing out up." She pointed a shaking finger toward the ceiling, toward the sky. "It's sending a signal into space. It's screaming for help." A new, terrible quiet fell inside the room as the word, space, hung in the air. The deep thump from the ground seemed to get even louder, as if in agreement. "Calling who?" Sterling demanded, his voice cracking. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Abernathy closed his eyes. "It's kind," he whispered. "The ones who sent the seed. It's telling them where it is. It's telling them that it's in danger. It's telling them that we are the danger." The four of them stood in the small, shaking house, trapped by a secret as big as the sky. They were no longer a farmer, a CEO, a son, and a scientist. They were just four tiny, scared people who had stumbled upon the end of the world. The deep, heavy thumping from the earth was a clock, and they all knew in their hearts that it was counting down. But counting down to what? What happens when the ones who get the message arrive? Mr. Sterling looked at his hands. These were hands that had signed checks for billions of dollars, that had crushed other companies, that had built empires of glass and steel. Now they were just shaking. He looked at Mr. Abernathy, a man he had called a fool, a worthless old farmer. And he finally understood. This was not about land. It was not about money. It was not even about the strange, hard rock. It was about everything. It was about survival. His arrogance, his pride, his anger, it all drained away, leaving him empty and cold. He turned to Mr. Abernathy, his suit covered in dust, his face pale. The power was gone. He was no longer a CEO giving an order. He was a small, lost child. What do we do?" he asked, his voice hoarse and broken. "You're the guardian. You've known this your whole life. You must know. How do we make it stop? How do we put it back to sleep?" Mr. Abernathy looked at Sterling, his eyes full of a sadness that was 1,000 years old. He looked at his son, Thomas. He looked at Elena. The thump, thump, thump was getting faster. The house felt like it might tear apart. The old man shook his head, a single, slow tear cutting a path through the dust on his cheek. "Sleep," he said, his voice full of a final, awful truth. "You can't put a star back to sleep." He held up the little leather pouch, the one full of rich, dark, living dirt. "We can't stop it. We can only try to calm it, to show it we aren't a threat. And there's only one way I know how." The old man walked out of the shaking house, his face set like stone. He was no longer a victim. He was the guardian, and it was time to do his job. He held the small leather pouch in his hand. The ground bucked and groaned, and a deep crack ran across the dirt yard like a bolt of dark lightning. Sterling, Thomas, and Elena followed him out onto the porch, stumbling, holding on to each other. They were looking at a world that was tearing itself apart. "What do we do?" Thomas cried over the terrible noise. "What's the gift?" Mr. Abernathy did not answer with words. He walked down the steps and onto the trembling earth. He held up the pouch of rich, dark, living soil. "It's thirsty," the old man said, his voice clear and strong above the roar. "It's been thirsty for 1,000 years. It's screaming because it is in pain." He looked at Mr. Sterling, his old eyes cutting right through the man's fear. "It needs a drink. A real drink. We have to give it back the water it has lost. We have to give it all the water we can find." For the first time, Mr. Sterling understood. All his life he had only taken things from the earth. Now he had to give something back. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so hard he could barely dial. The arrogance was gone. The greed was gone. All that was left was a desperate man trying to fix the biggest mistake of his life. "Mike," he yelled into the phone. "It's me. Get the water trucks. All of them. And the main pipe you dug, break it. Break it open. I want every drop of water we have poured onto that field. Now." While they waited, they did not just stand there. Thomas and Elena ran with Mr. Abernathy to the old stone well near the house. It was a well that had been dry for 50 years. But the old man grabbed the rusty handle and began to pump. Squeak, groan, squeak, groan. It was a hopeless task, a tiny drop in a thirsty ocean. But it was not about the amount of water. It was about the promise. It was about showing the heart that they were trying. It was an apology given with the sweat of their own bodies. Then they heard the horns. A line of huge silver water trucks came roaring over the hill, their tires bouncing on the shaking ground. They were like a silver army, coming to a battle they did not understand. The foreman, Mike, jumped out, his face pale. "You sure about this, boss?" he yelled. "This is everything. Do it." Sterling screamed, and it was the sound of a man giving away his entire fortune to save his own soul. The workmen aimed the giant hoses at the center of the field, right at the rusty spike. The water came out in a giant, roaring wave. It hit the dry, cracked earth with a hiss. But something amazing happened. The water didn't make mud. It didn't make a puddle. It just vanished. The ground drank it as if it were a sponge. A deep, happy sigh seemed to rise up from the earth. And as the water poured, the terrible thump, thump, thump began to slow down. It became softer, gentler. The violent shaking turned into a soft, steady rocking, like a baby being cradled to sleep. Elena looked at her sensor. The screaming sound was gone. The racing line was gone. On the small green screen, there was only a single, slow, peaceful pulse. Beep, beep, beep. The ground gave one last, gentle sigh, and then it was still. A deep, perfect, and holy silence fell over the farm. The sun began to rise, and its warm, golden light touched the soaked, dark earth. In the middle of the field, right next to the rusty spike, a tiny, bright green sprout was pushing its way up through the mud, reaching for the sky. And in the silence, there was peace. Thomas fell to his knees, not from fear, but from relief, and he sobbed. Sterling stood frozen, staring at the little green sprout, his face wet with tears of his own. The heart was not dead. It was calm. It was happy. It was growing. They had not killed it. They had fed it. They had saved it. And in doing so, they had saved themselves. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe that there are treasures in this world more valuable than money, please, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support is like that water, giving life to stories that need to be told. When you like this video and share it with someone you care about, you are planting a seed of your own. A seed of hope, of wonder, and of respect for the quiet, hidden magic in our world. Months later, the farm was a different place. The resort was never built. Mr. Sterling had used his fortune to create a foundation, a group of scientists and guardians, with Elena as their leader, to protect the land. The field was no longer brown and cracked. It was a carpet of soft, green grass and bright wildflowers, a place of impossible life. Thomas's little girl Lily was running through that grass, her laughter as bright as the flowers. She was completely healthy. The land, it seemed, had given back the gift it was given. Sterling, Thomas, and old Mr. Abernathy sat on the porch together, no longer enemies, but true partners, watching the little girl play, and they finally understood the true value of a worthless piece of land.